Welcome, welcome, guys, to another episode of the Spring Forward podcast. I'm your host, Spring Richardson-Perry, and today I have just a wonderful guest with us, Dr. Christopher Fox. He's helped dozens of financial innovators around the world show up and shine as thought leaders, and that's really what we're going to be getting into today is thought leadership. From fintech startups to global institutional banks, Dr. Fox crafts thought leadership strategies that cut through the noise and buzz to highlight innovators' unique expertise in their specific slice of the financial industry. He's a thinker, a writer, a speaker, and a motivator. And he is the founder and managing partner of Syncresis, which is a communication strategy firm that gives clients the tools to share their thinking, their story, and their passion for change in the world of finance. So without further ado, please help me welcome Dr. Christopher Fox. Hello, Dr. Fox.
Hello, Spring. It's nice to see you.
Yes, it is nice to see you. I am so excited to dig into this today because I think we hear a lot of the word thought leadership, right? But I'm excited to really dig into what that actually means.
No, that's great, and I agree. It's a term that is used a lot, and it could use some clarification. But before I say anything else, Spring, I just want to thank you for having me on your show. I'm really excited to do it.
Yay, absolutely. I'm excited to have you here. So let's dig in. The first thing I want to talk about is for you to share with us how you actually got into this work.
So that there's actually a few threads to the story of how I got into doing financial thought leadership. I'll try to tell it quickly, but my career started, I'm a former academic. I have a doctorate in French literature, and I was teaching French literature at the university level for a couple of years before I decided that academia really just wasn't for me. For anyone who can see the video in the background, you see that I'm still reading a lot of very academic like material, but I didn't really want it as a career. But it's still a piece, it's one of the threads of my story of becoming an expert and a strategist around thought leadership. And I'll explain why in a little bit. But from there, I had a lot of early career experience with content strategy very early on in my career as a content writer. And then as I developed and matured and grew my experience, more focused on what is the overall content strategy, not just the individual pieces. And I worked in a number of consulting firms and agencies. Uh, Through that process, I ended up getting a lot of exposure with institutional finance. And institutional finance, just to be clear, it's financial services that are for other financial services organizations. So it's a financial service that's delivered to banks or delivered to investment managers. And as I did more work in that space, I realized and I decided that I wanted to go off and do it on my own. So that's how I came to this point of thought leadership. The academic background is really all about enjoying wrestling with very complicated ideas and very complex content at high volumes. And then the career experience sort of grew into now it closes the loop from academia back to very complex and sometimes even academic topics in this sophisticated and niche area of institutional finance.
Wow. That is amazing. Academia can definitely be a hard space to be in. They are very traditional, and depending on where, what school you're at, especially in higher education, it's really kind of a hard space to be in. And when you are a person who sort of pushes against tradition, especially when
Right.
and especially when you're a faculty member or not yet like a tenured faculty member that they really have a respect for, and you're trying to earn that respect in academia, they sort of like toss you to the side. And so, I can definitely understand that. I'm working on my PhD right now, and I'm just like, oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
I can imagine.
But so, like I said earlier, thought leadership seems to be a buzzword these days. And so, talk to us about what really is thought leadership. What does that actually mean?
Yeah, so I would break down thought leadership in a few ways. One is that I would say that it's communication in any format. And the purpose of thought leadership is that it helps advance an entire industry, or it changes the way that decision makers in an industry or in a topic area make decisions. It changes the way they think about challenges, about solutions, about issues and trends that are happening in their world or their piece of the industry. And the other thing that thought leadership does is it explains the what and the why of innovation. So it's communication. It's not always written content. It's also communication, whether it's through podcasts, whether it's conference presentations, social media, all of the above. You think about thought leadership as a communication strategy as much as a marketing strategy, which is what I think a lot of the language and I'd even say the jabber that you hear about thought leadership in the world comes from the world of marketing, but it's actually at a higher level than marketing because it's about communications with intention in order to drive innovation.
So, talk to us about some of those common misconceptions. You've told us what it is, but what is it not?
Yeah, so there are a lot of misconceptions. There are a lot of misconceptions about thought leadership out in the world. One of the most common is that it's only written content. As I was saying earlier, it's any form of communication that is focused on influencing and communicating innovation. So that's uh, one misconception, assuming it's only written content. Another is believing that the thought leadership you produce needs direct product references or it needs your company branding. It really doesn't. It's about ideas, and it doesn't always have to tie in a very clear and linear way back to your products, back to your company brand. It can be more in this ideas oriented way of communicating things. Another real common misconception is that it's the same as educational content. So content that just explains a topic. So let's take something in institutional finance, for example. So when a city issues a bond, let's say they want to renovate some bridges in their city, and they'll issue a corporate bond, and that's one little tiny piece of institutional finance services is what happens to that bond, how do investors invest in that bond, etc. Sometimes companies in that space will develop very educational pieces about, what is a bond and how does it work. That's not thought leadership because those are things that people in the industry already know and they're aware of. And then the other side of that, a common misconception is that you some people in creating thought leadership will disregard the importance of expertise and they'll write this very generic content that's about the topic rather than about a brand new idea. And they try to force in all this marketing thinking. They start to use questions like, well, how do we take our thought leadership content and do search engine optimization? Or, well, we've heard that the best practice is to have our writing be at an eighth grade or a ninth grade reading level. So we have to do that with our thought leadership too. Or we have to worry about our engagement numbers, right? How many hits does the web page get? How many likes does the social media post get? With thought leadership, you actually throw all that stuff away and you focus on the purity of the idea and how you get that idea into the hands of decision makers who are making decisions, not just random people who stumble across it on social media or by doing a Google search, but very clearly the people and only those people that are relevant, that it's relevant to. So a piece of thought leadership, it might be almost incomprehensible to someone in a general audience if it gets really down into the technicalities, like I was saying about how a city issues a bond. That's very complicated. I won't bore anyone with explaining it here. It's not for this conversation. But a piece of thought leadership about that topic wouldn't be for a general audience. It would be for entities that issue bonds, investors that invest in bonds, um, service providers that provide some of the administration around that. And those are the only people that need to understand it. And the common misconception is that thought leadership needs to be easy to understand for everyone. That's not true. And I always say it's a really simple rule, right? To how do you break out all those different misconceptions, because there are so many. And this is something I say with my clients a lot. We talk about a content project, and it's like, well, if there's no thinking and there's no leading, then it's not thought leadership. And if you look at that, you take those words very, very literally. Is there any thinking? New ideas, new concepts, new ways of looking at the world? And is there any leading, as far as leading people to think about the challenges and solutions and trends in a different way? If those things don't exist, then whatever else you're creating, it's not thought leadership.
Yeah, that really resonates because a lot of times we are so focused on the social media popularity, right? And so it sounds like what you're saying is that sometimes thought leadership can sort of can sort of jiggle that, right? Can sort of say this is maybe an unpopular opinion, but this is the reality of this particular situation or what have you. And so it doesn't have to appeal to a wide audience. It just has to appeal to those people in that specific niche, and make sense to them because that's really who you're targeting, right? If and
That's right.
especially yeah, and especially if you're, like you said, building a brand, then you yourself are the brand, and wherever you go, your name will speak volumes. It's just like we all know who Steve Jobs is, and we associate him with Apple, right? But he did other things. But if his
Right.
name, if he were still alive and he decided to go somewhere else outside of Apple, we would know who Steve Jobs is, and we would trust that whatever it is that he's doing in that specific area, that he knows what it is because he's established his brand, his thought leadership in that area. So
Yeah.
it certainly makes sense what you're saying.
No,
And
100%, 100%. And there's this funny thing too, where like, if you imagine again in this institutional finance world, but I think there's parallels in many other types of thought leadership. If you have the discipline to sit down and say, there are literally only 100 people who matter right now for this one idea, maybe in institutional finance, it's the CEOs of the top 100 global banks. If there's only 100 people who matter and you manage to get 20 of them to read or take notice of your thought leadership, that's a massive success. And if it generated commercial results, it would have such a huge impact on your revenue as well as on things like your brand. There is no marketer in the world that would be happy with the idea of we're going to do all this work and only 20 people will see it. But it's that thing, those 20 people seeing it are what will triple your revenue, what will bring you this massive and high profile new set of clients that will do all these magical and large scale things that getting 50,000 views on some imaginary social media platform is absolutely meaningless.
well, I will say, YouTube is all about the numbers, right? And so
Right.
so while 20 people in your niche is great, and that's what really matters in this moment when you're trying to establish your thought leadership. You start small, but those 20 people will share it with other leaders, and your brand will organically start to expand. And so
Correct.
I love this. I love how you're establishing a brand for the long term, because a lot of what marketers do, from what I'm seeing these days, is to get you something for the here and now, but not really setting you up to be successful long term. And so that's where the difference is that I'm seeing here from what you do. And so that brings me into my next question here. Regardless of the company size or the role, how can individuals cultivate meaningful and original thoughts that contribute to their personal brand? Because again, um, you want to establish this brand that's going to be here for a while. So like,
Mm-hmm.
how can they come up with this?
That's a really good question. And I know I've been talking a lot about institutional finance, and what that implies is really big numbers. You're an executive within a institution or a company that has tens of thousands of employees. That is an important area, but what I'm saying really is applicable even if you are a founder or an individual just getting started and wanting to put your thought leadership out there. And whenever I start working with anyone, whether they're, an executive at a very large firm or just starting up, there's really I think that you start off by asking yourself as a potential thought leader a few really important and meaningful questions. And the first one is like, just really like sit down, be patient with yourself, talk to yourself, talk to a wall, talk to a mirror, talk to a friend also. It doesn't have to be something weird. You can also have real conversations with real people and push yourself to go down deep, deep, deep. What do I really think about this? So an example would be, right, like, so it's a little weird, but I'm a thought leader in thought leadership. And in order to be that, I have to ask myself over and over and over again, what do I really think about thought leadership? What do I really think about the power of social media engagement and whether or not it means anything? And challenge myself very philosophically, like, oh, do I really think that? Is that really true? Are there times when it's not true? And just pushing and pushing and pushing to get down to what do I really, really think about this? So that's place number one. It sounds like such a simple question, but make no mistakes, it takes work to get down to that level of understanding what I really think about this, not what I'm reading about in all sorts of different articles and everywhere else in the world, but me personally, what do I really think about this and why do I think that? And then you match that up against what's my vision for something better. I'll use my own example again. So there's all sorts of things that like to call themselves thought leadership out in the world. I don't think they necessarily work because they don't have that clarity and that intentional approach to delivering the thought leadership. So my vision for something better is thought leadership that is absolutely relevant, completely focused on the needs of the decision makers to whom it matters, and actually succeeds in changing the way that they think about their own world. And that's my vision for something better. So my thought leadership has to argue for those aspects of this kind of work. And then the other questions that you asked, there's only two more questions. So the other question is, what is no one else saying about this? No one else is saying, in my world, no one else is saying that it's okay to invest a lot of time and marketing effort in a piece of thought leadership that only 10 people will read. I'm saying that. There's all sorts of other things that I say that go back to, you used that phrase earlier, Spring, of an unpopular opinion. What are those things that no one else is saying, but that you believe are a missing piece in how people think about whatever your topic is? My topic is thought leadership. I mentioned bonds. It could be about best practices in K through 12 education. Like there's no area of the world that this is not relevant to. this idea of, well, what else is no one saying? And then the final question is, well, what do people ask me about? So the questions that my clients or potential clients come to me with, those also have that influence in saying, everyone's asking about how do I get my thought leadership onto LinkedIn? And I use that question as a way to say, well, wait a minute, is that really the right question? Not that I'm going to tell people, oh, I'm not so arrogant to say you're asking the wrong question and you should be thinking something else entirely. But why is that question their starting point? What they ask me about, that helps me decide what I want to write about as a thought leader. And it's also what I ask my clients about. So my clients will say, well, we're really interested in writing this blog post or this set of articles about the whole topic of environmental or social investing. And I always push them to say, all right, that's great. Well, the clients that you work with, what questions are they asking you about it? What is causing them to ask those questions? What's your answer to that question? And then you go back through all those other questions of, what do you really think? Why do you think it? What's your vision for better? And what is no one else saying? And if you keep that little cloud of questions in your head and just keep pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing on them, you'll find so many unopened, unexplored territories for thought leadership that can inspire you to continue to produce thought leadership on those areas.
That is certainly the academic in you. I can that but it's so like strategic and it's like, okay, what do I think? Why do I think this? Okay, but what is no one saying about this? It has an order to it, and then it's sort of cyclical and it brings you back to the beginning. Okay, here's another question. What do I think? Why do I think it? What are they not saying? What is not being said? So it makes perfect sense. And it sort of leads me into the next question here because we're talking about you know how can what I think and believe about certain things be considered thought leadership, and then how do I develop that thought leadership? But how can leaders communicate their vision and their ideas in a way that resonates not only within their organization but also extends to the broader business community and beyond? Because again, we're talking about a very niche area right here. And so you're saying if it only reaches 20 people, well, then that's okay. You've been successful. But if they do want to reach a broader community, how do they do that?
Yeah, reaching a broader community it's a great piece of it, because that initial set of these imaginary 20 people that we keep talking about, those people themselves are influencers, and they not only you change the way they think, but then they change the types of things that they talk about and communicate in the world. And some of the tools and the techniques that you use come back to, it's a little bit back to basics as far as creating high quality thought leadership requires excellent communication skills. It requires clear writing. You have to be able to write things that are readable, that people want to read, and that are persuasive. It requires a lot of research and reading to understand what people are thinking about already, what might be right or what might be wrong or what might be missing in all those things. And that's kind of the back to basics part of creating and then utilizing your platform as a thought leader. Now, the one thing that people are probably thinking, like, oh my gosh, that is so much work. You're asking me to do so much more, and I'm such a busy person. That's what you also have to realize, that you can lean on partners to help you with that, right? Not everyone is a great writer. That's normal. Not everyone does it. It's just, I think partly it's just your personal skills and how you like to do things. Maybe you're not a great writer, but you're a much better speaker. Maybe it's the other way around. Maybe you don't want to do all that kind of underlying research and reading. Um, Lean on partners to help you do that. Just clear writing, great communication skills, and in-depth research and reading are ingredients to that thought leadership. but that doesn't mean that you have to be the person who manufactures those ingredients yourself, right? It's like being a cook in the kitchen. You might be really great at baking bread or making cakes. No one is asking you to make your own flour. You're not out there grinding up the wheat and doing all these things. You lean on partners to do that. And it's a little bit of a plug for my own business, and that's what we do is we offer that partnership. We are your thinking partner, we're your writing partner, we're your communications coach. We will do that research and reading, and we'll help push you so that your thoughts are truly differentiated. So you lean on those partners, and then the other piece that I would say is really valuable is spend some time exploring and learning about the psychology of influence, how you influence other people with language, with behavior, sometimes with body language, if it's an in-person situation. The more that you read about the psychology of influence and the psychology of how people form their own opinions and how people make decisions, your thought leadership just naturally gets better as a result, and it will have impacts beyond that very small handful of people that are your immediate goal of reaching and influencing.
I love that. And one of the things that I was so shocked to find out and this was like maybe a few years ago when I got into business for myself, was the fact that people had writers for them, or they had like a communications coach or a speech coach or something like that. And that was so, it was a new concept to me, because I'm like, oh my goodness, some of the people that I followed and were really impressed by the content that they were putting out. I learned that they had someone sort of in the background helping them to create this content. And I just thought, oh my goodness, like that never even like crossed my mind to have someone there to help you, because I've always been a pretty good writer myself. But in terms of like the psychology of marketing, like you said, the psychology of influence, I never really dug deep into that. And so ironically, my bachelor's degree is in psychology, but
Hmm.
I never really dug into that sort of psychology. I've always been interested in educational psych and like in cognitive psych, which is sort of, I guess you can think of it as, influence, the psychology of influence, psychology of marketing, because you have to understand the way people think and the words that you use and how we influence them. But it was just a new concept to me in what you were bringing forward just now. And so
Mm.
I definitely encourage you guys, if you are looking to elevate your thought leadership, get in touch with Dr. Fox, because clearly he knows what he is doing, guys. This
Thank
is
you. Thank
these are
you.
things that I never even thought about, the things that he's bringing to light, and it makes so much sense, right? It's all the information I didn't know I needed. But you need it, because if you're looking to establish yourself as a thought leader, everybody will tell you, oh, you need to write a book. Oh, you need to have a podcast, or oh, you need to do this and do that. And so for some, it may work. Maybe you do have a lot to say to put into a book. And like for me, a podcast, I love doing this. I'm like really excited to meet new people and to lift up the things that they're doing, but that might not be the answer for every person. And so I love what you're doing, Dr. Fox. I love how you've broken this down, because so many people really see thought leadership as this very complex thing and
Right.
really daunting
Right.
thing, but you've broken it down very simply. You ask yourself a few questions and then you get to work. And so, again, if you're looking at elevating your thought leadership, Dr. Fox is here to help you do that. And if they want to work with you, Dr. Fox, how do they get in touch with you to learn more?
Yeah, so that's that. Thank you for asking that question, because I'm happy to have people reach out. And really, although I'm an expert and I focus on institutional finance, please be aware that I do speak with people in other industry areas as well, and I'm always happy to help. So I'm happy to have people reach out. Couple of easy ways to find me. One is through my website, which is syncresis.com. If you go through to my website, there are a few places that you can actually reach me. You can get through to me by email. You can sign up to my newsletter twice a month. I write a newsletter on topics like this. You can also access my learning platform. I've developed one and I'm continuing to develop more courses that talk people through how do you actually go through that process of asking all of those questions of yourself, developing the answers, building your thought leadership strategy, and then running your thought leadership strategy and being visible out in the world. So if you're looking for support with that, there's also online learning and coaching, and you'll find all of that stuff through my website, syncresis.com, or you can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active on LinkedIn, even beyond what I post in these other areas. I tend to post every day or nearly every other day something related to thought leadership. So connect with me on LinkedIn. I'm an open door. Unless you're trying to connect with me to pitch me some sort of services that have nothing to do with my work, which is happens way too often on LinkedIn. If you're just a human being and you want to be in touch and in contact with me and see other elements of the thought leadership question, please do connect with me on LinkedIn and reach out, send me a message. I'm very, very open door as far as all that goes.
That's awesome. And again, guys, that is Syncresis.com. That's Syncresis.com. So thanks so much, Dr. Fox, for being here. I've really enjoyed this and I've learned so much from you today. Again, all the things that I didn't know I needed to know in developing my own thought leadership. So thank you so much for being here and giving us this lesson today.
You're welcome. I'm so glad to hear that, and thank you again. I really enjoyed this, and it was an excellent conversation.
Yes. So thanks, guys, for tuning in today. And until next time, guys, on the Spring Forward podcast.